Miss, you've been standing here all by yourself all day. Who was the deceased to you? I glanced back at the crematorium attendant and answered calmly, I was the deceased. The attendant's face turned ashen with fear. Only after he confirmed that I looked nothing like the woman in the memorial photo did he finally speak. His voice was still trembling. Miss, this isn't something you should joke about. I walked over and patted him on the shoulder. If you knew it was a joke, why did you still get scared? The truth was, I had not lied to him. Ever since my brothers brought Quiana White home, all the love and attention that once belonged to me went to her instead. The day she tortured me to death, I opened my eyes again and found myself in her body. If becoming the person I hated the most was the only way to get my brother's love back, then what did it matter? I left the crematorium and saw my oldest brother, Theo Langford. Before I could say anything, he slapped me across the face. Who let you out before the 7 days were up? The slap turned my head to the side. A thin trickle of blood slipped from the corner of my mouth. After being bullied by Quiana White and my brothers for so long, I instinctively did not fight back. I lowered my head and bit my lip in silence. My reaction made Theo Langford's raised hand freeze in midair. You, what's wrong with you? His brows furrowed. A trace of surprise flashed across his eyes. The Quiana he knew would always throw a fit and cry hysterically whenever she felt even the slightest bit wronged. But at this moment, when he saw my lowered gaze and the dead silence around me, he seemed to see the younger sister they had personally driven to her death, Moon Langford. Theo, don't waste time talking to her. My second oldest brother, Hugo Langford, grabbed me by the collar. His eyes were filled with disgust as he shoved me hard toward the car. Moon has yet to be buried. Didn't we tell you to stay vigil at her funeral for 7 full days and repent? I stumbled and slammed into the cold car door before looking at them with an empty expression. My third oldest brother, Xander Langford, had been leaning against the car door the entire time. He stared at me without saying a word. They roughly shoved me into the back seat. When Xander sat down right beside me, his entire body seemed to give off a chilling aura. The atmosphere inside the car was so heavy that it was hard to breathe. I found it strange. They had never treated Quiana this way before. Quiana only ever needed to shed one tear for them to try and pluck the stars from the sky to comfort her. After I became Quiana, they treated me as if I were their sworn enemy. When we get home, pack up your useless junk, Theo, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, suddenly said in a cold voice. I looked up at him in confusion. Move out of Moon's old room. His voice was ice cold. You don't deserve to stay there. I froze. The resentment I had buried deep inside me could no longer be held back. When I woke up in Quiana's body, I thought that I could finally win back their love and favoritism. But why? Why did I still have to suffer such cruel treatment after becoming her? I won't. I stared at Theo's eyes through the rearview mirror. The car instantly fell silent. Screech. Hugo slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched against the road. Say that again? Theo turned around. His eyes were so dark and terrifying that it looked like he wanted to tear me apart. I said, I'm not moving out. I raised my voice and shouted at him. My eyes were red with anger. Why should I? That room was supposed to be mine in the first place. Slap. A much louder slap struck my left cheek. This time, Xander, who was sitting beside me, was the one who had hit me. What do you think you are? How dare you yell at us here? Xander grabbed my neck and pressed me hard against the car window. If it weren't for you, Moon wouldn't have died. I could not breathe. I coughed again and again. As I looked at the unbearable pain on his face, I suddenly found the whole thing ridiculous. Ha, ha ha ha. I forced a few laughs out of my throat. What are you laughing at? Hugo shouted furiously from the driver's seat. Isn't this what you wanted? I stared at every single one of their faces. Tears finally fell from my eyes. Now that she's dead, aren't you finally satisfied? Weren't you all hoping that she would die from the very beginning? Silence filled the car again. Xander's hand around my neck suddenly trembled. Then, he slowly loosened his grip. The three of them froze. A strange flicker of pain appeared in their eyes. Shut up. Theo was the first to snap back to reality. As soon as the car entered the villa's gates, he pulled me out of it. I stumbled and fell several times as he pulled me along. He dragged me all the way to the basement. Since you love talking back so much, stay here tonight and think about what you've done. The heavy iron door slammed shut with a loud bang. Darkness immediately filled the entire room. Cold air seeped in from every direction. I curled up in the dusty corner and trembled uncontrollably. I remembered that when Quiana came into this family, the first thing she asked for was my room. Back then, I cried and made a scene. I refused to give up my room no matter what. Theo had slapped me hard across the face just like he had done outside the crematorium. Then he had locked me in this wine cellar the very same way. Open the door. Let me out. I desperately pounded on the iron door. Outside, Theo's voice was colder than ice. No one is allowed to let her out without my permission. I thought about everything that had happened in the past. I stayed awake in the darkness for the entire night. I never thought that after something as absurd as becoming Quiana, I would still have to endure this kind of inhuman torture. Early the next morning, someone kicked open the iron basement door from the outside. Come out and eat. Xander's cold voice came from above me. I held onto the wall and followed him to the dining room. My steps were unsteady. My stomach cramped painfully from hunger. Out of habit, I walked toward the seat in the corner of the dining table. A porcelain bowl with pink floral patterns sat there. It was my bowl. Moon's bowl. Thud. Hugo suddenly kicked the back of my knee. I was not prepared for it. My whole body fell heavily to the floor. Who gave you permission to touch her things? Hugo stared at me with wide eyes. The look in his eyes made me afraid. Then, he raised his hand and pointed at the familiar corner of the room. Your bowl is over there. I looked in the direction he pointed, and my mind went completely blank. Quiana's delicate porcelain bowl with a gold rim was sitting there in plain sight on the floor. It was placed right beside the food bowl of the family's ragdoll, Blue. The scene looked painfully familiar. On the second day after Quiana came into this family, she threw a fit and insisted on getting a dog. My brothers immediately agreed and planned to take her to the pet store to pick one out. But she suddenly picked up a spiked dog collar and put it around my neck with a smile. Why bother them? Don't you think Moon looks just like a dog if she wears this and barks a few times? Back then, she had pointed at the food bowl on the floor just like Hugo did. My brothers had clearly allowed her to do it. At this moment, as I looked at the porcelain bowl placed beside the cat's food bowl, I could no longer hold back my tears. Hugo, why are you treating me like this? The words came out of my mouth before I even realized it. Hugo's body suddenly stiffened when he heard me. His expression went blank for a moment. Slap. A slap even harder than yesterday's struck my face. The force knocked me to the floor. You think you're worthy of saying my name? Hugo roared in anger. What kind of worthless piece of trash are you? You think you deserve to call me that? He grabbed me by the hair and dragged me up from the floor. Since you love pretending to be pitiful so much, I'll let you have your fill of it. He dragged me over to the bowl, grabbed the back of my head, and shoved my face into the boiling hot porridge. Ah! My scream filled the entire dining room. The boiling hot porridge immediately covered both my face and mouth. The unbearable pain of my burned flesh almost made me pass out instantly. I felt like I was about to suffocate. Driven by the instinct to survive, I desperately swung my arms around. My nails dug into the person holding me down and left several deep scratches on his arm. Ow! You crazy woman! Hugo cried out in pain and suddenly let go. I collapsed onto the floor. I covered my face, which had turned bright red from the heat, and curled up in agony. Hugo, you're bleeding. Theo checked his injuries. Drag this crazy woman out. Theo turned around and shouted at the bodyguards nearby. Two burly bodyguards grabbed my arms and dragged me outside the villa like I was nothing but a piece of trash. It was the middle of winter, and heavy snow covered the ground. They kicked my legs and forced me to fall into the freezing snow. Break her leg. Theo's voice was cold. There was not a trace of emotion in it. Make her stay there until she dies. Xander walked toward me with a thick baseball bat in his hand. His face was expressionless. He raised the bat high and aimed it at my right leg. This was exactly what Quiana had done to me back then. I had struggled and scratched her. That was why they had broken my leg without hesitation and forced me to stay out in the snow for an entire night. As I watched the bat come down toward me, the fear from my past swallowed me whole. Xander, I'm Moon. I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed with all my strength. Don't hit me. Please, don't hit me. The baseball bat cut through the air with a sharp whoosh. It stopped less than an inch away from my leg. Xander gripped the bat tightly. His entire body froze. A moment later, the confusion on his face was replaced by a deeper rage. You shameless woman, you actually dare pretend to be Moon? Xander gritted his teeth. The veins on his arm bulged as he tightened his grip on the bat. Do you think saying her name will save you? I'll break your leg today. He raised the bat again and swung it down with all his strength. There's a crescent-shaped birthmark on your left shoulder. I ignored the pain on my face and quickly shouted out everything I could remember. Theo is severely allergic to pollen. Whenever it happens, his entire back breaks out in a rash. When Hugo was 12, he secretly drank Dad's private collection of wine. He was afraid Dad would find out, so he buried the bottle under the tree in the backyard. The air seemed to freeze completely. The three of them stood there, stunned. Only the four of us knew about these things. After Quiana came into the family, no one ever mentioned them again. The bat fell from Xander's hand and hit the ground with a loud clang. Just as he came back to his senses and reached out to grab my collar, Theo grabbed his shoulder. "Stop." Theo's voice was terrifyingly low, but there was a hint of exhaustion in it. "How do you know these things?" I lifted my head and faced the snow falling around me. A bitter smile appeared on my face. "I told you. I'm Moon." I looked at their faces full of disbelief and gave a bitter smile. After I died, I opened my eyes and found myself in Quiana's body. "Ridiculous." Hugo sneered. "Do you really think we'll believe such an absurd lie you made up? You must have secretly listened to us before, right? You looked into Moon so thoroughly that you fooled us once. Now you're trying to fool us again? I'm not lying to you." My eyes turned red with desperation. I tried my best to prove myself. Just as they were about to lose control again, I suddenly remembered something. I hurriedly reached for the pendant around my neck. A red cord hung from my neck with a yellow dog tooth attached to it. I gripped the dog tooth tightly in my palm and held it out to them with trembling hands. "Hugo, do you remember this?" The moment Hugo saw the dog tooth, his eyes widened. His hand froze, and he stumbled back. He would never forget this dog tooth, even if he died, because he had risked his life to get it. When we were children, my family was not well off. I was closest to Toby, the mutt we had at home. I happened to see the dog dealers killing Toby in the village. I cried and rushed over. I hugged Toby's trembling body tightly and refused to let go. The dog dealers lost their temper. They raised their metal rods and were about to hit both Toby and me. That was when Hugo found us. Hugo was only a teenager back then, but he threw himself at those dog dealers without hesitation to save Toby and me. One of the dog dealers became furious. He pulled out a knife and slashed Hugo several times. I would never forget that scene. Hugo's blood splashed onto my face. His entire body was covered in blood, but he still stood firmly in front of me. In the end, the dog dealer fled after Hugo bit him like a madman and tore off a piece of flesh. Toby still died in the end. Hugo pulled out one of Toby's teeth and turned it into a necklace for me. I always wore it. "Toby is gone. I'll protect you from now on, just like Toby did." Those were the exact words he said to me back then. Later, after Quiana came into our family, she saw how much I treasured the dog tooth and wanted to take it away. I refused to give it to her, so she beat me badly and forcefully ripped it from my neck. "Where did you get this dog tooth?" Hugo's voice turned hoarse. I looked at him as tears fell down my face. "Hugo, can Toby's tooth really protect me?" Hugo stared at the dog tooth in my hand. His lips trembled violently. I had once begged Hugo to give it back to me. During those dark, hopeless days, it had been the only thing that kept me alive. But back then, he refused to listen to a single word I said. Instead, he slapped me again and accused me of pretending to be pitiful just to gain sympathy to frame Quiana. "Take her back to her room." Theo took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. Their attitude toward me had noticeably softened. At the very least, the bodyguards no longer dragged me around like I was a piece of trash. They took me back upstairs. The moment the bedroom door opened, I finally let out a long sigh of relief. To be honest, I never wanted to go through those hellish days in the basement or out in the snow ever again. That night, I went to my brothers and carefully told them that I wanted to move back into my old room. Theo sat on the couch with a deep frown. He looked at me for a long time. I thought he was about to lose his temper again, but in the end, he simply nodded. When I finally returned to the room that felt both familiar and unfamiliar, a strange warmth rose in my heart. My brothers had cleaned the room. They had put everything back where it belonged. The music box on the desk, the teddy bear beside the bed, and even the clothes in the wardrobe were all the ones I used to love. Then I walked over to the desk. I picked up the things that had once belonged to me, and I froze. Everywhere my name, Moon Langford, had once appeared, it had been replaced with Quiana White. I yanked open the drawer. I flipped through the photo album. I unlocked the small cabinet. In the family photo, my picture had been replaced with Quiana's. She had covered my diary, which was filled with my deepest secrets, with disgusting scribbles. Quiana had scratched my name off the protective charm my mother had left me. The lucky charm my brothers had prayed for and gotten for me when I was little had also been re-engraved with Quiana's name. I completely lost control. Ah. Like a madwoman, I tore my diary to shreds and smashed the protective charm my mother had left me into pieces. I grabbed the lucky charm my brothers had gotten for me and used it to smash everything in the room that could be broken. I pulled every piece of clothing out of the wardrobe and threw it onto the floor. The commotion quickly drew everyone upstairs. The moment my brothers saw the room in complete chaos and my frantic outburst, their faces changed. They rushed over to stop me. Have you lost your mind? What are you doing? Xander wrapped both arms around my waist and pulled me back with all his strength. Hugo looked at the diary that had been torn to pieces and the shattered protective charm my mother had left me. His whole body shook with rage. I knew you were putting on an act. You're Quiana after all. You still hate everything that belonged to Moon. I hate her. I stopped struggling and turned to glare at them. I suddenly held the lucky charm up in front of them. My brothers had gotten it for me when I was born seriously ill. The three of them had gone to the church together. Each of them had shaved half their head as an offering. They had prayed for 49 days before they received this lucky charm to protect me and keep me alive. You keep saying you loved Moon, yet you wouldn't even leave her name on the things that belonged to her. I used every bit of strength I had and threw the lucky charm out the window. I don't want this stupid thing anymore. The lucky charm flew dozens of yards through the night before it disappeared into the darkness. You're asking for it. Theo completely lost his temper. He raised his hand and charged toward me. The moment he charged over, I turned around and climbed onto the windowsill. The night wind blew through my thin nightgown. As my body tipped backward, I saw the terror on their faces. I pray not to be your sister in my next life. The wind howled through the open window, carrying with it a spray of ice and darkness. For a fraction of a second, my body hung weightless in the freezing air. The silhouette of the snow-covered courtyard rose up to meet me from 2 stories below. I closed my eyes, ready for the impact, ready to end this second, twisted farce of an existence. Moon. A roar tore through the room, a sound so raw and guttural it didn't sound human. Before gravity could drag me down, a hand shot out into the dark and clamped around my left wrist. The force of the catch jerked my shoulder violently in its socket. Pain spiked through my arm, but I didn't make a sound. I opened my eyes and looked up. Theo was hanging halfway out the window, his chest slammed against the icy wooden sill. His face was distorted with absolute horror, the veins on his neck bulging like blue ropes. Behind him, Hugo and Xander had thrown their bodies across his legs and waist, anchoring him to the bedroom floor as they pulled with everything they had. I've got you. Theo screamed, his voice breaking into a ragged crack. I've got you, Moon. Don't let go. Don't you dare let go. My wrist was slipping in his grasp. The cold night air made his palms slick, but he dug his fingernails into my skin so hard that blood welled up under his nails. I looked up into his bloodshot eyes. There was no coldness left in them, no aristocratic disdain, no righteous fury. There was only pure, unadulterated terror. Why are you saving me? I asked softly. My voice was barely a whisper against the roaring blizzard, but he heard it. Shut up. Just hold on. Theo sobbed, a sound I had never heard from him in my entire life. The oldest Langford, the untouchable head of the family, was weeping. With a final, desperate heave, the 3 of them dragged me back over the sill. We tumbled onto the hardwood floor in a tangled, bruised heap. The room was freezing. Snow blew inside, swirling over the torn pages of my diary and the shattered pieces of my mother's protective charm. Xander immediately scrambled over to me on his knees. His hands hovered over my body, trembling so violently he couldn't even touch me. His eyes swept over my scalded face, the dark bruises on my arms, and the thin nightgown I wore. Moon. Moon, please, Xander choked out, his chest heaving. Look at me. Look at third brother. Don't do that again, please. Hugo sat on the floor a few feet away, his back pressed against the wall. His hands were covered in his own blood from where he had scraped them against the window frame, but he didn't seem to notice. He stared at me, his mouth open, his eyes wild and glossy. I lay on the cold floor, staring up at the chandelier. The heat from the scalded skin on my face throbbed mercilessly, but inside, I felt nothing at all. No relief. No fear. Just a vast, empty silence. You dragged me back, I said softly, my voice flat. Why? So you could break my Other leg? Hugo flinched as if I had struck him with an iron bar. He let out a strangled gasp and buried his face in his bloodied hands, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. No, no, Moon, no. Theo scrambled to his knees and crawled over to me. He took off his thick woolen coat with frantic, clumsy fingers and wrapped it tightly around my shivering body. We didn't know. We didn't know it was you. You didn't know it was me, I repeated, turning my head slowly to look at him. So if I really were Quiana, it would have been fine? You would have let her freeze out in the snow? You would have broken her leg and shoved her face into boiling porridge? Theo froze. His jaw trembled, but no words came out. You loved her, I continued, my voice eerily calm. When she was Quiana, you treated her like a princess. You bought her jewelry, you took her on trips, you gave her everything she asked for. And the moment you thought she killed me, you turned into monsters. I let out a soft, dry chuckle that turned into a painful cough. You didn't turn into monsters because you loved me, I whispered, looking into Theo's devastated eyes. You turned into monsters to hide your own guilt. You knew you helped her torture me while I was alive. And once I was dead, you needed someone to punish so you wouldn't have to look in the mirror. The silence that followed was heavier than the blizzard outside. Theo stared at me, his face devoid of all color. My words had stripped away the last layer of self-deception he had built over the past 7 days. I pushed his coat off my shoulders, dragged myself up against the side of the bed, and pulled my knees to my chest. Get out, I said, looking away from them. All of you. Get out of my room. They did not leave the hallway. All through the night, I could hear their quiet, erratic breathing outside my locked door. They sat on the cold floor of the corridor, guarding the door like 3 terrified dogs afraid that their master would disappear if they blinked. At 4 a.m, the snow outside finally stopped. I sat by the window, watching the pale blue light of dawn creep over the estate. Down in the courtyard, 3 figures were bent over in the deep snow. I leaned closer to the glass. It was Theo, Hugo, and Xander. None of them were wearing winter coats. They were kneeling in the snow beneath my window, digging frantically through the frozen drift with their bare hands. The temperature outside was minus 15 degrees Celsius. They were searching for the wooden lucky charm I had thrown into the dark hours ago. Through the clear glass, I watched Hugo's fingers claw into the frozen earth beneath the snow. His skin had already turned a sickening shade of purplish black from severe frostbite. His fingernails were cracked and split, leaving dark red trails in the pristine white snow. Beside him, Xander was shivering so hard his entire frame rattled, but he refused to stop. He scooped away armfuls of ice, his breathing ragged and loud. In the crisp morning air, Theo was on his knees, his tailored trousers soaked through, his head lowered as his raw hands scraped against the gravel beneath the snow layer. They searched for 3 hours. When the sun finally rose over the trees, Xander let out a hoarse cry. He lifted his hands from a deep pit in the snow. Clutched in his bleeding, frostbitten palm was the small, mud-caked wooden charm. The cord was frayed, and the lacquer was chipped, but it was intact. Xander cradled the piece of wood against his chest like it was the most precious relic in the world. He collapsed backward into the snow, sobbing hysterically into the morning sky. 10 minutes later, the door to my room clicked open. Hugo stood in the doorway. He looked ghastly. His lips were blue, his hair was matted with ice, and his hands were wrapped in makeshift rags soaked through with blood. He walked into the room with stiff, awkward steps, as if his joints were frozen solid. He approached my bed, his head lowered, not daring to look me in the eye. With agonizing slowness, he knelt beside my bed. He took the wooden charm from Xander, who stood shivering in the hallway, and held it out to me with both hands. His hands shook so violently he could barely keep them steady. We found it, Moon, Hugo whispered, his voice completely wrecked. We found it. It's clean. I wiped the mud off. Please. Take it back. I looked at the piece of wood sitting in his blood-stained palms. 17 years ago, when I was born with a weak heart, the 3 of them had walked 50 miles up a holy mountain in the dead of winter. They had knelt at every step, shaving their heads to pray for my survival. The monks had given them this charm. For years, I had cherished it as proof that my brothers loved me. I reached out and picked up the charm. A tiny flicker of hope flared in Hugo's bloodshot eyes. His chest expanded as he waited for me to say something, anything. I turned the wooden charm over in my hand. Then, with a flick of my wrist, I tossed it into the trash can beside the nightstand. It landed among the crumpled tissues with a dull thud. Hugo's breath hitched. It sounded like someone had driven a knife into his lungs. Why did you dig for it? I asked, my voice as cold as the ice outside. Did you think finding a piece of wood would undo the 3 years I spent bleeding in this house? Moon, please, Hugo choked out, falling forward until his forehead touched the floor at my feet. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix it. I'll do anything. I'll let you break my legs. I'll let you cut my throat. Just don't look at me like that. Fix it? I let out a soft laugh. Hugo, when Quiana locked me in the wine cellar for 3 days without water, I begged you through the iron door. I cried until my throat bled. Do you remember what you said to me through the door? Hugo's body stiffened completely. You said, stop pretending, Moon. Quiana said you're just doing this to steal attention. If you die in there, it'll save us the trouble. I leaned down, my face inches from his shuddering back. You can't fix a dead girl, Hugo. By noon, the atmosphere in the Langford villa had descended into a suffocating madness. Theo had summoned a team of private investigators and safecrackers to the house. He had finally decided to break open the massive steel safe inside Quiana's private study, a room none of my brothers had ever allowed me to enter while I was alive. I sat in an armchair in the corner of the study, wrapped in a blanket, watching them work. Theo stood by the window, his frostbitten hands wrapped in white bandages. Xander stood near the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame, his face pale and hollow. The heavy iron door of the safe finally clicked open with a heavy mechanical slide. Inside were not jewels or stacks of cash. There were dozens of black hard drives, labeled neat notebooks, and small, sealed glass vials filled with clear liquids. Theo stepped forward, his trembling hands reaching into the safe. He picked up the top notebook and opened it. As his eyes scanned the handwritten pages, his face went from pale to a deathly, sickening green. What is it? Xander asked, his voice trembling. Theo didn't answer. He dropped the notebook as if it had burned his skin. He grabbed one of the black hard drives, plugged it into his laptop on the desk, and hit play on the newest video file. The screen lit up. A high-definition video began to play. The audio rang out crisp and clear through the silent room. It was a recording from 8 months ago. On the screen was Quiana. She was sitting at this very desk, smiling brightly into the camera. On the table in front of her were several open bottles of odorless, tasteless nerve inhibitors and hallucinogens. Day 142 of the experiment, Quiana's sweet, delicate voice echoed through the room. She giggled softly. I added 3 drops of the neurotoxin to Theo's morning coffee again. His temper is getting so deliciously violent. Yesterday, when Moon accidentally spilled water on his papers, he slapped her without even thinking. It's so easy. A little chemical imbalance, a little whispering in their ears, and these 3 idiot brothers actually think they hate their darling little sister. The room went dead silent. Theo stopped breathing. He stared at the screen, his eyes wide, his lips pulling back in a silent scream of agony. Quiana's voice continued from the speakers, light and airy, like a girl talking about her favorite shoes. Hugo is the easiest to manipulate. He's so guilty about that dog tooth necklace. Every time I tell him Moon tried to throw it away, he flies into a rage. And Xander? I just have to pretend Moon pushed me down the stairs, and he'll break her bones for me. She leaned closer to the camera, her smile twisting into something sickeningly sadistic. They think they're protecting me. They don't even realize I'm using them to tear Moon apart piece by piece. The best part? Moon still looks at them with those big, hopeful eyes, thinking her brothers will remember how much they used to love her. It's hysterical. Click. The video cut to another file. This one was recorded on the night I died. The camera was positioned inside the cold, dark garage. I was on the screen. My real body, thin, bruised, malnourished, wearing a threadbare dress. My right leg was bent at an unnatural angle from where Xander had broken it the day before. I was curled up on the cold concrete floor, shivering violently, clutching Toby's dog tooth necklace to my chest. Quiana stood over me, holding a pair of heavy iron shears. Your brothers are upstairs sleeping, Moon, Quiana's voice sang out in the darkness. They know I locked you in here. Theo even turned off the space heater himself because I told him you needed to learn humility. On the screen, my past self wept softly, pressing my face into the cold concrete. Why do you hate me so much? I gave you my room. I gave you my clothes. Why won't you let them love me? Quiana crouched down, grabbed my hair, and forced my face up toward the camera. Because as long as you exist, I'm just an adopted orphan, Quiana whispered venomously. But once you're dead, I'll be the only daughter of the Langford family. And the fun part? They're the ones who helped me kill you. On the screen, Quiana took the heavy iron shears and severed the cord of the dog tooth necklace. She kicked the tooth into the drainage grate on the floor, then turned on the car engine inside the sealed garage. Carbon monoxide began to fill the room. The video showed my past self struggling for air, gasping, pounding on the locked garage door with bloody hands while Quiana watched through the reinforced glass window, sipping a glass of red wine. The video ended. The screen went black. A noise came from Hugo's throat that sounded like a dying animal. He dropped to his knees, his hands tearing at his own hair. He leaned over and vomited violently onto the Persian rug. Tears, sweat, and vomit mixed together. As he screamed into the carpet, beating his fists against the floor until the bones in his hands cracked. I killed her, Hugo shrieked, his voice raw and bleeding. I killed my little sister. I locked the door. I turned off the heat. I killed her. Xander backed away from the desk, his hands clasped over his head. He slammed his back into the wall, sliding down until he was crumpled on the floor. He began to smash his head back against the hard wooden paneling over and over again, blood smearing down the wall with every hit. Stop it. Xander, stop. Theo tried to yell, but his voice gave out. Theo stood in front of the laptop. His entire frame was shaking so hard he had to grab the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. He looked at me. I was still sitting in the armchair, watching them with empty, glassy eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I had already shed all my tears in that dark garage 8 months ago while the carbon monoxide filled my lungs. Moon, Theo whimpered, falling to his knees in front of my chair. He reached out with his bandaged hands, hovering near my knees, not daring to touch the hem of my dress. Moon. God. Oh God, Moon. What did we do to you? You believed her, I said softly. My voice was dead, devoid of any warmth or passion. Every time she lied, you believed her. Every time I begged you to listen to me, you slapped me. You broke my leg, Xander. You locked me in the dark, Hugo. And you, Theo. I looked down at the top of his bowed head. You told me you wished I had died of heart failure when I was a baby so you wouldn't have to carry such a shameful sister. Theo let out a shattered moan and pressed his face against my knees, weeping so hard his chest convulsed violently. Kill us, Xander gasped from the corner, his forehead bleeding heavily, his eyes wild and insane. Moon, please. Take a knife and kill us. Punish us. Don't. Just sit there. Hit us. Slash us. Please, Moon, I'm begging you. I looked at Xander's bloody face and shook my head slowly. Why would I dirty my hands? I asked softly. Living with what you've done. Knowing that you personally tortured the sister who loved you more than her own life, that's a far better punishment than death. I pushed Theo away with my foot, stood up from the armchair, and walked out of the study. 2 days later, the White family, Quiana's biological relatives, arrived at the Langford estate. They had heard rumors that Quiana had fallen out of favor and was being kept under house arrest. They had come to demand money, armed with legal documents Quiana had signed before her death that transferred a significant portion of Moon's remaining trust fund to them. Mr. White, a fat, greedy man with yellowed teeth, stormed into the grand living room accompanied by his wife and son. Where is Quiana? Mr. White shouted, slamming his briefcase onto the glass coffee table. You Langfords can't just lock up our daughter. She signed a contract. Half of Moon Langford's estate belongs to us now. I walked slowly down the grand staircase, wearing a simple black dress. When Mr. White saw me, or rather, when he saw Quiana's body, his eyes lit up with greed. Quiana. You stupid girl, where have you been? Get over here and sign these final transfer papers. He stepped forward and raised his thick hand to slap me across the face for keeping him waiting. Before his hand could even come close to my skin, a shadow flashed across the room. Crack. A sickening sound of snapping bone echoed through the living room. Hugo had lunged forward like a rabid animal. He grabbed Mr. White's wrist and twisted it backward until the forearm bone snapped, protruding through the sleeve of his expensive suit. Mr. White shrieked in agony, falling to the floor and cradling his broken arm. Touch her again, Hugo snarled, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale and sunken. He looked like a corpse brought back to life. Touch her again and I will tear your arms off. Mrs. White screamed in terror, scrambling back toward the door with her son. Xander walked down the hallway holding a thick black leather folder. He didn't say a word. He opened the folder, pulled out a thick stack of financial documents and evidence files, and threw them onto Mr. White's bleeding chest. Every asset Quiana White illegally transferred to your family has been frozen, Xander said, his voice flat and lifeless. By tomorrow morning, the police will arrest you for extortion, fraud, and complicity in murder. You will spend the rest of your lives in prison. You can't do this. Mr. White whimpered through his tears, clutching his broken arm. Quiana is your favorite. You loved her. Theo stepped out from his private office. In 48 hours, he seemed to have aged 20 years. Deep dark circles hollowed his eyes, and his hair was streaked with gray at the temples. He didn't even look at the White family. He waved his hand, and 6 burly bodyguards dragged the screaming White family out of the front doors and threw them into the rain. The front doors slammed shut. The 3 brothers turned to look at me. They stood in a line, trembling, waiting for a single nod of approval, a single sign that I was pleased with what they had done. I looked at the blood on Hugo's hands. I looked at Xander's bandaged head. I looked at Theo's trembling frame. Are you waiting for me to thank you? I asked softly. Hugo's breath hitched. Moon, we got rid of them for you. They can never hurt you again. You didn't do it for me, I said, stepping past them toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. You did it to make yourselves feel like heroes again. Just like you did when you beat those dog dealers for Toby 17 years ago. I paused and turned my head slightly. The only difference is, 17 years ago, you actually cared about the dog. Today, you're just trying to buy back your own peace of mind. Over the next month, the Langford estate transformed into a bizarre, gilded cage of repentance. The 3 brothers tried everything humanly possible to fix what was broken beyond repair. Theo liquidated all of Quiana's assets and donated every single cent, over $50 million, to orphanages and children's heart foundations in Moon's name. He personally renamed the Langford Group's flagship charity after me. Hugo spent 3 weeks standing in the freezing rain in front of the city's top cosmetic surgery institute, begging the world's best specialists to fly in and treat the scald marks on my face. When the doctor successfully removed the scars, Hugo knelt in front of the clinic for an entire night, weeping tears of gratitude. Xander rebuilt my old bedroom. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars tracking down every single item I had owned as a child that Quiana had thrown away. He bought back my old piano from an auction house at 10 times its value. He found the exact model of the teddy bear my mother had bought me before she died. They filled my room with white roses, my favorite flowers. They prepared my favorite meals 3 times a day, standing outside my room, holding the trays, waiting for hours just to hear me take a single bite. They never slept inside their own rooms anymore. Every night, the 3 of them slept on the cold floor of the hallway outside my bedroom door, terrified that, if they left for even a second, would vanish into thin air. I accepted none of it. I didn't yell. I didn't break things. I treated them with the polite, distant respect one reserves for strangers. When Theo brought me hot milk, I said, "Thank you, Mr. Langford." When Hugo tried to hand me my coat, I said, "Thank you, second young master." When Xander brought me the restored diary, I said, "You shouldn't have troubled yourself, third young master." Every title, Mr. Langford, second young master, third young master, was like a poisoned dagger plunged into their hearts. One evening, as rain beat heavily against the glass of the living room, Theo could bear it no longer. He collapsed to his knees right in front of my chair, grabbing the hem of my skirt. "Don't call me that," Theo begged, his voice cracking into a sob. He pressed his forehead against my foot. "Call me brother. Please, Moon. Call me Theo. Hit me. Spit on me, strip me of everything I own, but please don't call me Mr. Langford." Hugo and Xander sank to their knees beside him. "Moon, please," Hugo wept, pulling out a sharp silver dagger from his coat and offering it to me hilt first with trembling hands. "Take this. Stab me in the shoulder. Stab me where I hurt you. Just give us one chance, one single chance. To be your brothers again." I looked at the silver dagger sitting in Hugo's hands. Then I looked at the 3 men kneeling at my feet, sobbing like helpless children. "You want me to call you brother?" I asked softly. They looked up, their eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. "My brothers died 3 years ago," I said quietly, looking into their eyes one by one. "The brothers who walked 50 miles up a holy mountain for me are dead. The brother who bled for Toby is dead. You 3 are just the men who buried them." I pulled my skirt out of Theo's grip and stood up. "I have already arranged everything. Tomorrow is the 49th day since Moon Langford died. It's time for me to leave." The next morning, a heavy fog enveloped the city. I walked down the steps of the Langford villa carrying a single, small black suitcase. Inside were only a few sets of simple clothes and the yellowed dog-tooth necklace that Hugo had pulled from the drainage grate in the garage after searching for 3 days in sewage. In my pocket was a new legal identity card. I had legally changed Quiana White's name to a completely random, plain name, Nora Lynn. I had erased Moon Langford from the world. I had erased Quiana White. At the gates of the villa, 3 expensive black cars blocked the driveway. Theo, Hugo, and Xander stood in the pouring rain, waiting for me. None of them held an umbrella. They were completely soaked, their clothes clinging to their gaunt, exhausted frames. Theo stepped forward holding a heavy leather binder. "Moon," Theo said, his voice trembling violently against the cold wind. "This is the deed to the estate. It's the entire ownership structure of the Langford Group. 90% of the shares have been transferred to your new identity. Everything we own is yours." He thrust the binder toward me, his hands shaking so hard the papers inside rattled. "Take it," Theo wept. "Take all of it. Go anywhere in the world you want. Just don't cut us off completely. Let us send people to protect you. Let us know you're alive." I stopped in front of him. I looked at the legal documents worth billions of dollars. Then, I took a lighter from my pocket. Click. A tiny orange flame danced in the gray fog. I set the corner of the heavy leather binder on fire. The flames caught quickly, burning through the thick paper, turning the deeds, the shares, and the power of the Langford Empire into black, swirling ashes that washed away in the rain at our feet. Theo watched the fire burn his life's work into nothingness, his jaw slack, his eyes hollow. "I spent 2 lives trying to earn your love," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly through the sound of the falling rain. "When I was Moon, I would have given my life for a single kind word from you. I would have died happy if you had just held my hand once when I was sick." I looked at Hugo, whose face was covered in tears and rain. I looked at Xander, who was clutching his chest as if his heart were tearing apart. "Now that I finally have your love," I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "I realize it's completely worthless." I picked up my suitcase, walked past them, and kept going down the long, winding driveway toward the main road. "Moon." Hugo let out an agonizing scream and tried to run after me, but his frostbitten knees gave out. He collapsed hard into the mud, crawling forward on his hands and knees, reaching toward my receding back. "Moon. Don't go. Moon." Xander fell to his knees beside him, sobbing so hard he threw up blood into the muddy rain. Theo stood frozen in the middle of the road, staring at my back as I walked away into the heavy fog. He raised his hands to his face and let out a long, shattered howl that echoed across the empty estate. I didn't turn back. Not once. 5 years later, In a small, quiet coastal town thousands of miles away from the capital, the morning sun broke through the blue horizon. A small, cozy bookstore sat near the edge of the wooden pier. The sign above the door read the Blue Harbor. A young woman in a simple linen dress pushed open the front glass door, flipping the sign from closed to open. She had smooth skin, dark gentle eyes, and a calm, radiant smile. Around her neck hung a yellow dog tooth attached to a simple red cord. She took a deep breath of the salty ocean breeze, picked up a watering can, and began to tend to the potted white lilies sitting on the windowsill. Her name was Nora. Nobody in this town knew who the Langford family was. Nobody knew about the scandal that had destroyed the capital's elite years ago. She lived alone in a small house overlooking the sea. She slept peacefully every night. Her heart was healthy and strong. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, in the capital, the Langford villa had become a silent, decaying tomb. The once dazzling gardens were overgrown with weeds. The grand living room was dark, the curtains pulled tight to block out the sunlight. The Langford Group, once a dominant financial empire, was now barely a shell of its former self. The three brothers no longer cared about business, wealth, or status. Theo sat in the dark study, holding an old, faded photograph of a little girl with a bright, innocent smile. His hair was completely white now. He spent 16 hours a day staring at the front gates through the window, waiting for a girl who would never return. Hugo lived in the basement, the very wine cellar where he had once locked me. He slept on the hard, cold floor, refusing to use a mattress or heater even in the dead of winter, torturing his own body in a desperate, pathetic attempt to feel the pain his sister had felt. Xander traveled continuously. For 5 years, he had visited every city, every town, every village across the country, walking through crowded streets with a stack of missing person flyers, searching every face in every crowd. Every night, he would call Theo from a different payphone, his voice hoarse and broken. "I didn't find her today, brother. I'll check the next city tomorrow." They were trapped in an eternal winter of their own making. They were alive, but their souls had died on the night they helped murder their little sister. They would spend the rest of their lives searching for forgiveness from a ghost who had already moved on. Back at the coastal bookstore, the young woman finished watering her flowers. A gentle breeze blew in from the ocean, making the little brass bell above the door chime softly. Nora looked out at the vast, endless blue sea, pulled the warm cardigan tighter around her shoulders, and smiled softly at the morning sun. She was free.